The Taiwan Strait is 130 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. That sounds like a lot of ocean. It is not. For a warship conducting a transit under the gaze of two military establishments, one on each shore, 130 kilometers is a corridor, a lane, a gauntlet with clearly defined walls and no room to pretend you are anywhere other than exactly where you are. The People's Republic of China claims the strait as internal waters. The United States does not recognize that claim. Taiwan does not recognize that claim. Every nation whose commercial shipping passes through these waters, which is most of the world, does not recognize that claim. The way the U.S. Navy expresses that non-recognition is simple. It sails through. The Taiwan Strait carries more than 40% of global container shipping. On any given day, 100 commercial vessels are somewhere in that corridor. Supertankers from the Persian Gulf heading for East Asian ports, container ships from Chinese factories bound for North American shelves, LNG carriers whose cargoes light homes from Tokyo to Seoul. The commerce of the modern world runs through this channel. The United States Navy transits it not to provoke, but to demonstrate that international law, not Chinese territorial claims, governs what happens here. Each transit is a legal statement expressed in tonnage and navigation lights. The Chinese response to that statement has evolved over the years. It used to be surveillance, aircraft and surface vessels tracking U.S. ships from a respectful distance, collecting intelligence, noting the transit, and doing nothing to impede it. Then it became presence. Coast Guard vessels closing to uncomfortable ranges, making radio broadcasts, asserting jurisdiction without enforcing it. More recently, it had become geometry, not just presence, but choreographed, multi-vessel formations designed to box, slow, escort, and document U.S. transits under conditions that Beijing could present as Chinese management of Chinese waters. The destroyer entered the strait from the south at 9:17 a.m., maintaining a steady 15 knots on a course that tracked precisely down the median line, the unofficial but widely understood center line of the waterway, equidistant from the coasts of China and Taiwan. The median line had no legal standing under UNCLOS. It had enormous practical standing as the implicit agreement that governed how two military establishments coexisted in a corridor neither fully controlled. On this morning, the median line was about to become the subject of a disagreement. The first contact appeared on the CIC radar display at 9:31 a.m. A large surface vessel emerging from behind a promontory on the Chinese coast, 22 nautical miles to the northwest. The radar cross-section resolved quickly. The combat systems team had it classified within 90 seconds. A Type 052D destroyer. Plan, hull configuration, electromagnetic signature, and speed profile consistent with the Luoyang 3 class, displacing 7,500 tons, armed with a vertical launch system carrying 64 cells of anti-ship and surface-to-air ordnance. Top speed in excess of 30 knots. One of the most capable surface combatants in the Chinese inventory. It was accelerating toward an intercept on the U.S. destroyer's port beam. 14 seconds later, the second contact resolved on the starboard side. Also emerging from the Chinese coast, this one from a different angle, further north, clearly positioned to complete a bracketing geometry. Another Type 05 2D. Same classification confidence, same acceleration profile. 2, Type 05 2Ds. One approaching from the port quarter, one from the starboard bow, both accelerating. Both on courses that, if held, would place them on parallel positions alongside the U.S. destroyer within 19 minutes. One on each side, matching speed, boxing the transit lane from port and starboard simultaneously. 2 minutes after that, the third contact appeared. This one came from ahead. A China Coast Guard vessel, a Type 818, 12,000 tons, that had been holding position 9 nautical miles north of the destroyer's course, apparently stationary. It was no longer stationary. It had begun a slow, deliberate deceleration on a southward heading, positioning itself directly in the transit lane, not on a collision course, not moving aggressively, simply decelerating in the center of the strait on a course that would place it ahead of the destroyer within 12 minutes, reducing speed at a rate carefully calibrated to compress the forward distance without ever quite stopping. The geometry was immediately clear. 2 planned destroyers compressing from port and starboard. 1 CCG mega cutter decelerating ahead. If the U.S. ship held course and speed within 12 to 19 minutes, it would be inside a box, flanked on both sides at close range, with a 12,000-ton vessel slowing the transit to a crawl ahead. Any deviation, any course change to avoid the CCG vessel ahead would push the destroyer into one of the planned flankers. Any deceleration to create separation ahead would allow the flankers to close. The box was not designed to stop the transit. It was designed to control it, to force the destroyer into a subordinate geometry, surrounded, slowed, escorted under conditions China defined, and film every moment of it for the record that Beijing intended to use as evidence of U.S. acceptance of Chinese authority over the strait. The tactic had a name in plan doctrine, though not one that appeared in any open source document. It was a variant of the cabbage strategy adapted for the confined geometry of a major waterway. Instead of rings expanding outward from a contested feature, this formation compressed inward from 3 points simultaneously, creating a moving enclosure that traveled with the target rather than surrounding it from a fixed position. The innovation was the forward element. Previous Taiwan Strait interceptions had used port and starboard flankers alone, which created discomfort but no hard stop. Adding a decelerating forward vessel completed the cage. The target could not accelerate through the box without closing dangerously on the forward vessel, and could not slow without allowing the flankers to compress further. 3 vessels, 3 vectors, 1 U.S. Navy destroyer at the intersection of all 3. $2.1 billion of American naval engineering inside a Chinese-defined corridor, moving at a Chinese-defined pace, surrounded by Chinese-flagged hulls on 3 sides. That was the objective. CPA to the Type 052D on the port side, 2,800 yards, closing. CPA to the Type 052D on the starboard side, 3,100 yards, closing. CPA to the C, CG type, 818 ahead, 6,400 yards, closing. Channel 16 activated at 09:38 a.m. The broadcast was in Mandarin first, then English, professional, unemotional, scripted. The U.S. destroyer was informed that it was transiting waters subject to Chinese jurisdiction, that its current course and speed were noted, and that it should maintain awareness of vessel traffic in the area. No demand to stop. No explicit threat. A statement that sounded administrative on its surface and was, in its delivery during an active three-sided approach, a territorial assertion dressed in procedural language. The destroyer did not respond. In the gray zone, responding to a sovereignty claim validates it. The absence of response was its own answer. Not ignorance, not failure to receive, but deliberate non-acknowledgement of a legal framework the United States did not recognize and would not legitimize by engaging with it. The Seahawk launched at 9:41 a.m. It climbed to 800 feet and began a slow orbit pattern that covered all three approaching contacts simultaneously. A wide, unhurried circle that kept each vessel within its camera and sensor envelope at all times. From 800 feet over the Taiwan Strait, the Seahawk's optical system could read hull numbers at 5 nautical miles. The planned destroyer crews knew this. The CCG crew ahead knew this. Everything that happened in this strait for the next 30 minutes would be documented by a U.S. military asset whose footage existed outside Chinese editorial control. CPA to port side, type 05, 2D, 2,200 yards. CPA to starboard side, type 05, 2D, 2,500 yards. CPA to CCG, type 818 ahead, 5,800 yards. The captain stood at the center bridge window. Behind him, the officer of the deck tracked the tactical picture with the navigator. Ahead, through the bridge windows, the strait spread out in a flat, tropical morning that offered no visual drama equal to the numbers developing on the CIC display. The water was pale jade. The sky was white with humidity. Both shores were invisible behind the haze, which meant the crews on both planned destroyers were watching this encounter on radar, not with their own eyes, and that the only visual record being created in real time was the Seahawk's. He had 26 years of surface warfare behind him. He had transited the Taiwan Strait 7 times. He had never transited it with a box forming around him on 3 sides simultaneously. And he had never transited it while a Type 052D's fire control radar was cycling through what the electronic warfare team was now describing as pre-illumination mode. Not a lock, not active targeting, but the electronic behavior of a system preparing to transition from search to fire control. Pre-illumination mode was a signal. In the language of electronic warfare, it said, "We are one step from active targeting. We have made the decision to be ready without making the decision to act." It was a pressure tool as much as a weapons preparation step, designed to raise the temperature in the target's CIC, to force the target's electronic warfare team to report it to the captain, to introduce into the captain's decision calculus, the knowledge that a targeting system on one of the flanking vessels was warming up. The electronic warfare petty officer had reported it at 9:43 a.m., 2 minutes after the Seahawk launched. Her voice was even. The report was factual. Port side contact, emissions profile shift, consistent with fire control radar transition to pre-illumination. She had seen similar profiles before in simulation. She had not seen one in the Taiwan Strait from a vessel at 2,200 yards off the port beam, At 09:43 on a Tuesday morning, the captain noted it, set it aside, made his decision. The pre-illumination report did not change the tactical solution. It confirmed it. Hesitation. Any deviation from the planned response, any half measure, any course change that could be read as reactive rather than deliberate, would register as a response to the electronic signal. The planned crew would know their fire control cycling had produced a behavioral change in the U.S. ship. That was information they would use in every subsequent Taiwan Strait operation. The response to pre-illumination pressure was to ignore it completely, as if the electronic warfare report had described a minor navigational update rather than a planned destroyer's fire control system entering pre-targeting mode 2,200 yards off the port beam. At 9:44 a.m., the destroyer increased speed from 15 to 22 knots, not 30, not maximum 22, a deliberate, calculated increase that served two purposes simultaneously. First, it changed the forward geometry. At 22 knots, the time to contact with the decelerating CCG vessel ahead compressed rapidly. But on current courses, the U.S. ship would pass the CCG cutter's bow, rather than closing behind it into a forced slow situation. The CCG vessel was decelerating to create a slow ahead trap. The destroyer was refusing the trap by accelerating through it before the trap closed. Second, 22 knots was a speed the planned destroyers could match, but matching it required them to accelerate simultaneously, which disrupted the careful choreography of their flanking approach. A flanking box worked when both sides could close and hold position at the same rate. An unexpected speed increase forced a recalculation, a recoordination, a gap in the compression timing that could be exploited. The port side Type 052D accelerated from 18 to 21 knots in 40 seconds. It was fast. The Luoyang 3 class had reserve speed capacity, but the acceleration pulled it slightly ahead of its optimal flanking position. Its CPA, calculated for 15 knots, was now arriving at a slightly different geometry. The box was shifting. The starboard side Type 052D was slower to react. 2 full minutes elapsed before it matched speed. In those 2 minutes, while the port side flanker was slightly out of position and the starboard flanker had not yet caught up, there was a window in the box's eastern wall, narrow, closing, but present. CPA to CCG, Type 818 ahead, 3,200 yards. Approaching the bow crossing point, the Seahawk descended to 400 feet and repositioned to the CCG vessel's forward aspect, the same position it had occupied during the Scarborough intercept 3 weeks earlier. Camera on the bridge, laser marker on standby. Not deployed, not necessary yet, simply present in the CCG crew's visual field, 400 feet above the water, directly ahead of them, documenting every movement of their vessel at a resolution that would survive any post-incident dispute about what had actually happened here. At 9:49 a.m., the destroyer crossed the CCG Type 818's bow at 1,400 yards. Not 580 yards, not 800, 1,400. The speed increase had opened the geometry enough that the bow crossing was clean, a controlled pass at a distance that international maritime law described as the upper end of proximity requiring caution, not the lower end requiring action. The CCG vessel continued its deceleration. It did not accelerate to maintain the blocking position. To do so would have required a course change that placed it on a convergent heading with the destroyer at speed and a 12,000-ton CCG cutter maneuvering into a convergent heading with a 9,200-ton warship traveling at 22 knots in the center of the Taiwan Strait was a scenario nobody in that CCG crew's chain of command had authorized. The CCG Type 818 fell behind the stern at 9:51 a.m. Forward arc clear. The box now had only two walls, port and starboard. Both planned destroyers were still present, still closing, still matching the destroyer's course and speed. CPA to the port side Type 052D had stabilized at 1,800 yards, close, inside the aggressive threshold, but no longer compressing. CPA to the starboard side Type 052D was 2,100 yards and holding. Both planned destroyers had settled into parallel escort geometry, matching course, matching speed, one on each side at distances that were deliberately uncomfortable, close enough to require continuous monitoring, close enough to make every course correction visible, not close enough to constitute an immediate collision risk. This was the shoulder, not the same as the CCG shoulder tactic in confined waters. This was two modern destroyers, both armed, both capable of significantly more than they were doing, choosing to simply be present alongside the U.S. ship for the duration of the Strait transit. A visible assertion. We are here, we are watching. This corridor is ours, and we are demonstrating that fact by staying within sight of your bridge for as long as you are within our waters. It was, in its way, the most sophisticated form of gray zone pressure the plan employed. No aggression, no provocation that could be cited in a formal complaint. Just presence. Sustained, deliberate, documented presence at a distance calibrated to be oppressive without being illegal. The cost of that presence was real, even without weapons release. The bridge crew had been at elevated readiness since 9:31 a.m. The electronic warfare team was monitoring 3 separate contacts simultaneously, logging emissions profiles, flagging any change in mode that could signal escalation. The CIC watch team was maintaining continuous tactical plots on all 3 vessels, while also managing the commercial traffic that the Strait's normal activity added to the radar picture. Freighters and tankers passing on parallel courses, oblivious to the geometry playing out among the warships. At 10 a.m., the watch rotation was technically due. The captain held the current crew at their stations. Not yet. Not while the box was still present, even in its reduced form. The helmsman had been on course since 9 a.m. He was 24 years old. He had held the median line of the Taiwan Strait for 53 minutes, with 2 planned destroyers on parallel courses within 2,000 yards on either side. His heading had not varied by more than half a degree from the ordered course in the entire time. Not because he was unaware of what flanked him. The bridge windows showed the planned vessels clearly. Gray hulls against pale water, close enough that he could see their bull waves. But because the heading said median line, and his hand said median line, and those 2 things were the same thing, and nothing that happened at 1,800 yards on the beam changed that. The destroyer held course and speed. At 9:57 a.m., the electronic warfare team reported a change in the portside Type 052D's radar emissions. The pre-illumination cycling that had been present since 9:43 a.m. had stopped. The system had returned to standard search mode. It was not a dramatic change. No alarm sounded. The technical report went to the captain as a quiet notation in the tactical feed. The emissions profile normalized. The captain noted it, said nothing. In the language of electronic warfare, an adversary system returning to search mode after extended pre-illumination cycling meant one of two things. It had achieved its objective, or it had decided the objective was not achievable at current conditions. Given that the forward arc was now clear and the box had been broken, the second interpretation was more consistent with the tactical picture. The port side Type 052D had been prepared to transition to active fire control mode if the U.S. destroyer altered course in a way that could be characterized as threatening. The destroyer had altered course, but in a direction and at a speed that could not be characterized as threatening by any definition that would survive international scrutiny. The escalation chain the plan had prepared for had not materialized. CPA to port side Type 052D, 1,800 yards, stabilizing. CPA to starboard side Type 052D, 2,100 yards, stabilizing. Both vessels held their escort positions for the next 41 minutes as the destroyer continued north through the strait. They matched every speed change. They mirrored every minor course correction. They were present in the way a shadow is present, inseparable from the object they followed, but incapable of stopping it. At 10:51 a.m., as the destroyer approached the northern exit of the strait, the port side Type 052D began to fall back, its speed reduced by 2 knots over 4 minutes, a gradual withdrawal that avoided the appearance of breaking off, as if the escort was simply concluding at the natural end of the relevant waters. The starboard side Type 052D followed 12 minutes later. By 11:09 a.m., both planned contacts were 8 nautical miles behind the stern and receding. The Taiwan Strait transit was complete. On the bridge, the watch rotation changed at 11 a.m. The outgoing officer of the deck briefed the incoming watch officer in a level voice, noting the planned escort contacts, the CCG forward blocking attempt, the speed increase to 22 knots, and the bow crossing of the Type 818 at 1,400 yards. The incoming watch officer logged it, standard language, factual, the kind of entry that, read in isolation, conveyed almost nothing of the 94 minutes it described. The helmsman who had held course through the flanking approach went below, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat down. His hands were steady. He had been at the helm since 9 a.m. He did not think about what had been on either side of the ship at 1,800 yards. He thought about the fact that the course had been the median line, and the course had stayed the median line, and the median line was now 8 miles behind him, and everything ahead was open water. That was enough. The Taiwan Strait is 130 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The U.S. Navy transited it that morning using approximately 400 meters of that width. The other 129.6 kilometers were irrelevant. What mattered was the 400 meters, The lane the destroyer actually sailed, the line it actually held, the passage it actually completed. 2 planned destroyers, 1 CCG mega cutter, 94 minutes of 3-sided pressure, CPA minimum 1,400 yards on bow crossing. Median line yielded 0 meters. The Taiwan Strait opens to the East China Sea in the north. It always has. The ship that proves it does so without firing a weapon, without breaking a law, and without deviating from its course by a single degree that wasn't chosen deliberately.